The die is cast. The narrative is permanently etched into the timeline. The dust from the victory has cleared. The metropolis shifted focus. Yet, the definitive figure whose signature anchors this entire reality is still hiding behind a wall of glass, refusing to project a single utterance. Let that gravity resonate for a moment. Because the absolute vacuum of noise confronting us right now carries more volume than any viral title, any broadcast conversation, or any audio file that touched the airwaves this calendar year. Look, I genuinely had zero desire to enter this specific theater of war. I truly didn't. I monitored the chessboard from a distance. I hesitated and allowed a window of grace. I kept scanning for that definitive upload, that single digital nod, that particular flashpoint that would shatter the existing narrative. But the void remained unbroken. And that brings us to the precipice. Because by the time I dismantled this entire structural illusion, the digital captures, the virtual paper trails, the public arrivals, and every single Papoose sighting from these past cycles will take on a completely chilling form before your eyes. I am giving you that guarantee right now. So, let's cross directly into the fallout of the triumph. The Knicks locked down the ultimate victory. The ticker tape ocean engulfed Manhattan. The avenues choked with bodies. The collective was in hysteria. And the concrete jungle possessed its operational anthem. Without warning, the official championship anthem bled into distribution, labeled across platforms as the Knicks won the chip. And sitting prominently within the creative blueprint, the identity tethered to the sonic engineering belonged to Swizz Beatz. Monolithic milestone, historic canvas, massive distribution network. On paper, this was engineered to be Papoose's absolute highest peak in a generation. But this is the exact coordinates where the frequency warps. Swizz Beatz dissolved into total radio silence. No grid post, no shared story, no ephemeral slide, no community acknowledgement, no unscripted live broadcast, no definitive statement, absolute zero. And this behavior originates from the exact same curator who traditionally operates his digital landscape like a curated museum for his legendary catalog. The precise same Swizz Beatz who will pull an unreleased DMX artifact from 20 winters ago and champion it with the same energy as a global drop happening this afternoon. The very same Swizz Beatz who illuminates the most microscopic components of his own sonic legacy. Yet, when the curtain pulled back on this specific master tape, the one carrying his physical name and the metadata, the architect who built the foundation suddenly evaporated from the conversation. And make no mistake, the culture isn't treating this as some accidental oversight anymore. Sectors are interpreting it as a calculated execution. And inside this terrain, sometimes an absolute freeze communicates more than an open mic. Now, before we drop deeper into this psychological maze, I must isolate an anomaly that the general public is completely driving past right now because the digital masses already selected their allegiance and started running with the initial leak they encountered. The prevailing theory claims Papoose got outmaneuvered. The commentary dictates that Remy Ma manipulated the entire infrastructure. Observers are digging through archival timelines and historical data, but virtually no one is fixing their gaze on the one coordinate that bridges these separate worlds into a singular conspiracy. And this data point didn't materialize from a common media blog or a blind item profile. This explosive intelligence allegedly surfaced from a restricted producer backchannel that was designed to remain permanently under lock and key, but somehow suffered a digital breach. We are unlocking that vault shortly. Do not move. Let's map the chronological alignment first, because the calendar leaves no room for coincidence. While Swizz Beatz maintained a frozen posture regarding Papoose's record, his operational footprint was burning bright across every other sector. He was active. He was highly visible. He was projecting public adoration for Alicia Keys, embracing the championship parade, broadcasting localized moments, and positioning himself inside elite configurations with the highest level of players. Now, analyze that specific inner circle for a brief instant. Pay attention to the architecture of that room because Remy Ma was firmly anchored inside that secure perimeter. Fabulous held ground. French Montana occupied the frame. Alicia Keys was anchored at the center. Every single entity possessed an explicit coordinate inside that matrix. But Papoose was completely erased from the canvas. Now view this layout with total clarity. You are looking at a veteran producer whose identity is explicitly bound to Papoose's most critical master tape of the year, publicly validating and standing shoulder to shoulder with Papoose's estranged spouse while simultaneously refusing to manifest that identical frequency toward the piece of art bearing his own legal trademark. Read that equation one more time and let the weight settle, because the question morphs into where exactly is the psychological alignment in that scenario? And if we are being completely transparent, there is none to be found. Anchor that reality in your mind, because this is the exact coordinate where the elements on the board begin to realign directly before our eyes. The culture transformed into full-time forensic analysts over the course of a single night. And to be completely transparent, the connections they are making are impossible to dismiss. The prevailing theory dominating the digital forums, the backchannel dialogues, and executive offices is that Swizz Beatz may not have engineered this championship anthem under the conditions the public blindly assumed. The growing consensus suggests the instrumentation was likely acquired, leased, or funneled through a corporate transaction that permitted Papoose to append Swizz Beatz's trademark to the liner notes without Swizz ever physically stepping foot in a creative workspace beside him. No collaborative engineering, no creative friction, no post-production tailoring, simply a sterile line item on a legal contract. And if that scenario reflects reality, it completely upends the entire geopolitical landscape of this narrative. Because inside the architectural hierarchy of music makers, a credit isn't merely a string of text on a screen. A credit signifies explicit validation. A credit broadcasts alliance. A credit signals to the power brokers, this is an entity I am willing to guarantee. And if Swizz Beatz intentionally withheld the public validation the market anticipated, and is actively choosing to erase it from his promotional schedule, then observers are no longer categorizing that behavior as passive neutrality. They are categorizing it as an active strike, and the entire infrastructure is monitoring the fallout. Hold up, freeze the frame right here, because I promised we would circle back to that locked producer thread, and I am going to leak a critical fragment of what is being debated behind the scenes since you have pushed this far with me. The narrative circulating, and I am emphasizing the word allegedly so there is no legal confusion, is that when this basketball anthem was initially teased to the public, several beat architects inside an exclusive network were caught completely off guard. Because the inner circle surrounding Swizz Beatz, the specific gatekeepers who possess real-time data whenever his brand attaches to a high-profile release, reportedly had absolutely no intelligence concerning this placement. They didn't receive a briefing from the mixing suite. They were locked out of the internal pipeline. They discovered the alliance the exact same way the general public did, by watching the promotional rollout and reading the metadata. And when one prominent figure allegedly transmitted a message of congratulations to the central management camp, the text that came back reportedly stated something to the effect of, "That didn't originate from our house." Let that particular anomaly marinate for a moment. And here is the structural power dynamic observers continuously ignore regarding Remy Ma. Her network cannot be reduced to superficial internet clout. Her alliances are poured like industrial concrete. Remy graduated under the direct mentorship of Big Pun, may his soul find eternal rest. She outlasted one of the most ruthless epochs in the history of New York street culture. She absorbed devastating losses, materialized from the wreckage with greater force, seized monumental accolades, cemented her footprint on Viacom networks, redefined the paradigm of reality television, and is currently carving out an entirely fresh media empire through her partnership with Lifetime. That isn't a temporary trend. That is a multi-decade fortress of leverage. That represents 20 winters of direct access lines being answered on the first ring. Generations of showing up when the media cameras were completely dark, years of absolute confidentiality established out of the public eye. So when Remy Ma coordinates a cultural moment, specific titans manifest automatically. Swizz materializes. Alicia materializes. Fat Joe holds down the flank, French is in position, Maxby is present immediately following his liberation, and that Now, let's synthesize this entire hidden geopolitical layout because I know we have burrowed dangerously deep into the microscopic details, and you demand the terrifying macro overview. Here is the unvarnished status of the board from a completely detached point of view. Swizz Beatz has strictly executed a total digital blackout on Papoose's basketball anthem across every single visible social media platform, while simultaneously, he is aggressively amplifying Remy Ma's local urban takeover, Alicia Keys' Metropolitan Stadium coronation, and the broader high-level victory summit that sharp observers immediately noted was completely hollowed of Papoose's shadow. That deliberate behavioral alignment is physically impossible for the core demographic to ignore. This dark trajectory refuses to be written off as a simple random variable or a scheduling glitch. This pattern, tracking the hard evidence and speaking strictly allegedly, plays out like a legendary sonic architect broadcasting a silent, devastating manifesto through the exact placement of his institutional power. And if that diagnostic rings true, this crisis explodes far beyond a single streaming file. This instantly mutates into a terminal, catastrophic psychological branding crisis because inside the theater of rap, your primary alliance matures into your literal corporate image. Your executive producer's endorsement becomes your ultimate psychological body armor. When the precise entity chained to your highest profile release of the winter is loudly championing a parallel narrative while enforcing a total, suffocating blackout over your intellectual property, the spectators decode it, the major executives decode it, the venue promoters decode it, the power playlist curators decode it, the radio syndicates decode it, the streaming teams decode it, and inevitably, the core audience internalizes the dark frequency as well. And once the mass audience detects a permanent psychological pattern, it becomes legally and mathematically impossible to ever force them to unsee the crime scene. So the definitive riddle I am dropping directly onto your doorstep isn't a moral cross-examination regarding whether Swizz Beatz is pulling the correct strategic trigger. The genuine, blood-chilling paradox is whether Papoose possesses the raw situational awareness to decode the encrypted warning shot being beamed directly at his fortress, whether his inner management circle can read the dropping temperature of the environment, and whether they can orchestrate a desperate course correction before this freezing wall of silence solidifies into a permanent, lifelong eviction from the circle. Because here is the brutal, classified reality the major labels actively bury from independent casualties caught in this exact tactical crossfire. Absolute, frozen silence from a legendary institution is rarely the final execution order. Frequently, it operates as a structural warning shot. On occasion, it serves as a cold, calculated atmospheric test. And room temperatures can be completely reprogrammed, but that miracle demands an alpha operator possessing the raw humility to look around and acknowledge that the oxygen in the room has officially hit absolute zero. Not by launching a sloppy, defensive social media tantrum, not by executing desperate public counterattacks, but exclusively behind heavily fortified doors through a singular, unfiltered confession, one raw, high-stakes negotiation over a secure line. Because a seasoned industrial titan understands a universal law. Whole empires can pivot on the axis of a single whisper, a solitary elite window, a singular shattered alliance systematically stitched back to life. The impending text of this tragedy can be entirely re-authored much faster than the gullible spectators assume. But the haunting question remains, will that emergency call ever be initiated? The metrics remain completely dark. The pending operational maneuver rests completely on that specific coordinate of the boardroom. And this precise reality explains why the narrative refuses to dissolve into the background after a 7-day cycle. Because this monumental Knicks triumph isn't confined to a singular midnight celebration. It functions as an unfolding calendar of events. The horizon holds impending gatherings, additional arrivals, high-profile summits, blinding lenses, fresh visual captures, and continuous windows for the public to analyze who populates the frame side by side and who is entirely omitted. Every solitary instance translates into a fresh fragment of data, an additional transmission, another permanent receipt. And the longer the geometric vacuum remains unfulfilled, the more deafening the frequency becomes. That reflects the true leverage of withholding noise inside this cutthroat ecosystem. A frozen posture manufactures a permanent narrative. Absolute quiet generates intense speculation. Subterranean tension forces the spectators to magnify the details. And when an icon wielding the institutional leverage of Swizz Beatz engineers a visible boundary out in the open, parallel power players inside the infrastructure instantly adjust their radar. They begin calculating what hidden variables they overlooked. They start executing interrogations that were previously considered completely off-limits. And that is the exact point where the landscape warps into chaos. Because on occasion, it isn't an outright liquidation of the asset. It functions merely as a strategic hesitation. It is the delayed transmission. The bureaucratic deflection of checking the corporate calendar. The automated message that executive management will follow up at a later date. The systemic polarization that no corporate entity openly articulates, yet everyone implicitly acknowledges. That is the definitive asset currently sitting on the chopping block. This expands far beyond a singular audio file, far past a solitary celebratory snapshot. This is a battle over the structural legacy surrounding a legendary New York Titan's ultimate rank inside the food chain. Now, I demand your diagnostic analysis on this situation. Do you calculate that Swizz Beatz is masterfully broadcasting a silent endorsement toward the Remima faction? Do you believe the internet is over-analyzing a standard corporate scheduling conflict, or are we witnessing the most masterfully camouflaged corporate strike executed all season, hidden directly behind the layout of a standard creative credit line? Drop your data points below because this geopolitical dialogue is far from its final conclusion. And before you terminate this feed, remain acutely aware that this operational file is actively updating. More broadcasts are hitting the network. Additional public collisions are locked into the calendar. Fresh audio assets are preparing to drop. The high-profile remix is aggressively sustaining its momentum. The comprehensive lifetime rollout is continuously compounding its reach. The historic victory celebration is spinning out fresh theoretical debates with every passing sunrise. And every single impending milestone will materialize as another piece of forensic evidence. The culture will dissect an altered element, a fresh legal chapter. So, if your goal is to intercept the next transmission the millisecond it breaks, keep your system completely locked into this channel, because the impending signal possesses the power to rewrite the entire global conversation.